Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Operational Technology Cybersecurity Best Practices Clinic. This is session 3 in a 3-part clinic series, and we're glad that you could join us for this third and final session in our clinic. I wanted to jump in and just give a quick recap. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll just talk about a recap of what we've covered so far and where we're headed next. So in our first session, we covered on visibility, talking about you can't protect what you can't see. Our second session, we talked about control and enforcing security across your network. And the third session today, we're covering situational awareness, and we'll introduce that topic in just a moment. Before we get started, we wanted to just cover a few housekeeping items, common questions that we get asked when we're hosting webinars. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at 3 things that are housekeeping for our session. A first question commonly asked is, can we get the slides and any supporting material? A resounding yes to that question. In your GoToWebinar console, there is a widget called Handouts, and you'll see there are 2 handouts provided for you for today's topic. The first is a copy of today's presentation material. Feel free to download those and take them with you. The second is a white paper that we have recently released. That paper is talking about securing OT systems in the face of our rapid threat evolution. So both options for you, take them with you, share them with colleagues. They're available for your use. Second, we love to get questions from the audience. And I wanted to make sure you saw the questions widget in your console in GoToWebinar. Our session content will run about 25 minutes, and we'll have time at the end for questions. So please submit those that come to mind as we move throughout the content. And third and final, another resounding yes, there will be a replay of this session. About 24 hours from now, you'll receive an email saying thanks for attending. Here's a link to the replay. You can feel free to listen again or share that with colleagues. And if any of your colleagues signed up for today but could not make it, they will also get a link with a copy of review of the webinar today and can see it in case their schedule didn't permit them to attend live. So let's jump in and talk about who's presenting today. Our first couple of presenters covered visibility and control, and that was Rick Peters and Carlos Sanchez. Today we have Michelle Balderson with us. Michelle is a veteran of Fortinet. She's been with the company for 15 plus years and is very passionate about cybersecurity in general, but specifically cybersecurity as it relates to operational technology environments. Today at Fortinet, she spends most of her time supporting our Western US and Canada regions as a subject matter expert in operational technology and industrial control systems. So let me say welcome, Michelle, to our session today.
Good morning, Cheryl.
Let's go to the next slide, and before you jump into the topic, let's do a quick poll of our audience to get some background on our listeners. So our poll for today, everyone, is how confident are you with your process for responding to, responding to a breach, or responding to an attack should your organization suffer an attack over the course of business? So we've got some response options there. Take a look at those. And what we'll do is push that poll out to you now, and you guys can respond accordingly. So are you not confident? You don't know what you don't know? Limited confidence. We have some blind spots. Somewhat confident. We test our process routinely. 100% confident. Continuously monitor with our tools. And the fifth choice is don't know where you're at. So we're interested to see your response to how confident are you with your process for responding should your organization suffer an attack. We'll give people about 5 more seconds to respond, and then we'll take a look at the results. If you wanted to take a guess, Michelle, where do you think the number 1 of these 5 choices might be? Let's take a guess, and then we'll look at the results.
I think that most of the customers or most of the folks on here would be somewhat confident in that they test processes fairly routinely. I think we'll have some that aren't confident and others that are highly confident, but I think the majority of them will sit within somewhat confident. What do you think, Cheryl?
Well, I got a peek at the results, so it's probably unfair for me to give you the answer. So let me repeat to you what our audience replied. So in number 1 place, everyone on the call said 41%, said they're limited confidence. They have some blind spots. In second place was somewhat confident. We test our processes routinely. Next was 15% saying we're not confident, we're not sure, we don't know what we don't know. And then 7% said 100% confident, congratulations to that 7%. And 7% said don't know. So with that as a backdrop and some of the knowledge from our audience, why don't you take us through the content for today's situational awareness topic?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Cheryl. I think in looking at the poll is that the poll is actually kind of showing the results that I was expecting, which is some folks are going to be very confident in what they have, and other folks are not going to be so confident within what they have. And I think that based on my experience of security being a journey over the course of a long period of time, I've been doing security for over 20 years of my life, that we have to evolve security to be able to keep up with the risk. So it's perfectly fine to be somewhat confident. We just simply have to take a look at it from the perspective of how do we gain situational awareness to be able to protect our environments against those risks and vulnerabilities that we have. In the previous sessions, what we talked about was visibility, control, and now what we're going to talk about is situational awareness. In visibility control, what we talked about was being able to understand the different assets that you have within your environment. You really can't protect what you can't see, as what Cheryl had said. From a control perspective, is that we really need to be able to apply control anywhere within the environment. Although Fortinet is a firewall company, and where we've come from is firewalling, really what we're talking about is being able to put controls throughout the entire environment. That leads to being able to have situational awareness. And previously in visibility, we would have talked about being able to pull out telemetry from the environment. And within that is being able to then understand that telemetry by having the awareness to be able to then have actionable intelligence and timely and appropriate response to risk. And the reason why we ask the poll question is, for the most part, when we get in front of customers, when we ask the question of how confident is the executive management in responding to risk, there's a lack of confidence because we may not necessarily have the awareness to be able to truly protect our environments. So we framework off of the NIST framework. That's what we've talked about over the course of the last two sessions, and in this session we'll continue on with that. From the NIST framework, I think situational awareness is foundational to having a secure security operations and mature network operations. Foundationally, situational awareness are within the detect and the respond aspects of NIST in the NIST framework. And that during these sessions, we've built up the concepts. So we've built up these concepts from identify and protect to detect and respond now. And essentially, it's just like building a house. So I like to be able to use analogy today. Identify is really truly the foundation of the house. When we get into protect, that's adding in the walls and the doors. It's adding in the control component pieces of controlling our house. Now, when we get into detect and respond, it becomes the situational awareness is understanding what is happening and the conditions inside and outside of our house. So when a storm is coming, we recognize that storm because we're getting external resources. We're getting the Weather Channel telling us that the weather is going to change. And our reaction to that storm is being able to then close our windows, being able to secure our home, and dependent upon how bad that storm is, which is indicators of compromise, right? So we want to be able to understand indicators and being able to respond appropriately to that storm. We may take the extraordinary step of shuttering our house and being able to then drive away from the storm to be able to really address that. So really what I'm talking about is in real world life, we become aware, we shut our windows. We need to be able to do the same things in an OT environment, which is we need to be able to understand and gain information from identifying to be able to protect the environment, to be able to then respond appropriately to the risk, and being able to assess that. We would need to really start with endpoint. Endpoint is the starting point and the last point of defense. It's the first line of defense, it's the last line of defense. In the respect of threats coming from the internet, it's the last line of defense. Threats coming from the physical, it's the first line of defense. Our endpoints, PLCs, RTUs, and servers, are really protecting the physical equipment that is extremely expensive. So what we need to be able to accomplish is being able to collect telemetry and data and logging from those machines. And in fact, when we're talking about servers that are running Windows, we may even have advanced logging capabilities like WMI. The key thing here is that we need to be able to collect that information just like a weather report to be able to understand how we're going to be able to respond. With that is we have to understand the communication between the systems, the communication from the systems, to be able to allow us to understand what normal operation is and what potentially abnormal operation is, to be able to understand the risk to the user. So the risk to the user is basically a safety aspect of it, the risk to the device, which is the PLC or RTU, but then also the risk to the physical aspects. What this allows us to do is gain insights into understanding how a device may be compromised or a user may be compromised, and then using that appropriate information to be able to respond and being able to protect that endpoint. We also need to be able to take into consideration logging, reporting, and analytics. And a sub to that is really understanding management and analytics and visibility into our business operations. And in understanding our business operations is that the plant floor operators within OT really need to be able to align what they're doing to the security and the business operations, meaning that I need to be able to ensure safety and availability of my operations, and I need to be able to have consistent tools that allow the operators to have confidence within their systems to ensure safety and availability. That is then being able to, the key takeaway would be to be able to have consistent management, adds, moves, and changes, but then also consistent reporting and logging to be able to allow the operator so that they understand that they trust this environment because of what they see from the perspective of the manageability of the environment. In this circumstance here, in my analogy earlier from the perspective of my house, this is our house. This is how we're protecting our house, which is adds, moves, changes, understanding the visibility, understanding the context of business operations. But beyond that, what we need to be able to understand is really truly understanding our neighborhood. And understanding our neighborhood is what is around us. So around us, I want to be able to collect data from the entire enterprise, but I also want to be able to collect information from experts within the field, and that, as an example, would be indicators of compromise from the environment or from the global collection of security. That then allows us to be able to do and take that analytic approach and understand how we're doing appropriate reporting to be able to then get to appropriate response. So what this does is it allows us to be able to collect the information, and then we also want to be able to, in collecting the information, we want to be able to orchestrate that information. And orchestrating that information is really truly about auditability and also having a timely and appropriate response. From an auditability perspective, what we want to be able to do is orchestrate additional data points around it and the data that we've collected that shows us that we have some risk. What we also want to be able to do is just take that data to be able to then say, this is proof that this is a concern to our environment. And so in the end, the key takeaway from this is that we need to be able to arm our businesses to be able to understand the risk to the business, to be able to take and have an appropriate timely response, which is then moving into orchestration and automation of the response. Now in OT, I like to be able to talk about automatable responses. And because automatable responses really is being able to move into domain expertise. So as we collect data across the entire enterprise to be able to understand the risk to the enterprise and the risk to our operations, we need to be able to also engage domain experts. And in those domain experts, no one better than the person who's operating the equipment to be able to understand and assess a risk to the environment. So when we orchestrate the data together and then we're starting to respond, we can stop the process and say, hey, domain expert on the IT side or the OT side or anywhere else within the operations component piece, is this, and do you determine this to be a real risk to the business? If so, let's continue on to be able to address this risk. If you don't believe it to be a true risk to the business, then let's go into a document phase and make sure that we're documenting that this isn't a risk and that we can continue on. Additionally, within orchestration and automatable response solutions, it allows us to be able to collect the data to be able to create a single source of truth across the entire enterprise of all of the different assets, the users, the applications, and how they're interconnecting, to be able to then have a single source of truth, which then ties into ticketing systems. I'll talk about that further as I go along. Domain experts need to be engaged to be able to have appropriate and a timely response to risk. So how do we pull this all together from the perspective of the Fortinet Security Fabric? The Fortinet Security Fabric allows us to have broad, integrated, and automated response to risk. And in the circumstance of OT, I like to use the automatable response. And then I'm going to talk about the pillars, but in the end, what I'm going to talk about the most is the AI-driven security operations and network operations. So really, from the perspective of the presentations that we've talked about before, we've talked about visibility, control, and now we're talking about situational awareness. So the visibility and control starts with the zero trust access, moves into security-driven networking. So zero trust access, I understand the endpoints. I can put controls to the users and endpoints. Security-driven network, I can respond appropriate to risk. Adaptive cloud security and application security allows me to respond to context to how the applications are operating. And then from the area that I'm talking about is really being able to protect, detect, and respond, which is then having that security AI-driven operations. And in addition to that is that our open ecosystem, this is, as I said, this is a community effort across our home, our community, and the globe. We also need to be able to use situations and have situational awareness from different open ecosystems to be able to respond appropriately to risk. And therefore, then what I'm saying is Fortinet's not the end all be all. You can use your existing environment, but then embrace the ability of being able to respond to situational risk appropriately. So really what I'm talking about today is that protect, detect, and respond. In the NOC SOC, so in the previous presentations, you would have seen us talk about, and we talk about Purdue modeling a lot. This is really truly about the NOC SOC, and the component pieces are FortiManager and FortiAnalyzer. FortiManager adds, moves, changes, the true capability of having the operational folks understand that things are under control. That then is having consistent management of the Fortinet component pieces. The FortiAnalyzer allows us to be able to understand the Fortinet component pieces, the FortiGates, the switches, the APs, and being able to do analytic component pieces. The FortiAnalyzer also has the ability of having a SOAR light capability. So if you're looking to invest within SOAR, but you're not certain if it will make sense to your environment, well, we can start with the manager and analyzer, and then we can move to a greater degree of security maturity. Now, what the SIM does is allows us to be able to collect the data outside of our home. So in our home, we're protecting with the manager and analyzer and the gates and the switches and the APs. The SIM then allows us to be able to collect all of the information from the network, from the servers, from the hosts, from all of the different telemetry to be able to take and do incident event management. In that incident event management, then at that point we can use the FortiSOAR to orchestrate. The O is critically important within OT. We orchestrate and understand the data that's coming from the SIM, collect additional information to be able to do threat hunting, and then have an automated or automatable, right? Because in OT we want to have an automatable response with human intervention. That's where the SOAR comes in. And the R in SOAR is that response. We can't do it all at Fortinet. And so we've talked previously about visibility vendors and control vendors. Today, really, I'm talking about operations, orchestration, and automation. So as above to this, we tie into things like ticketing systems. So I'll just use ServiceNow as an example. From the lower levels of the visibility and the threat intelligence that we've collected, we now pull all of that information in, and then ServiceNow can become the single source of truth. ServiceNow, then our systems can inform ServiceNow of risk. That will then tie ticketing systems in, and now we can have an appropriate response. So think of this from a response perspective of working backwards, which is now I'm responding. I can now have enforcement, and that's enforcement everywhere. That's the control component piece. But I have the appropriate visibility to respond appropriately because I've collected that information from the lower levels of the Purdue model and responding appropriately. Most importantly, in my opinion, is that I talked about our home, I talked about our community, I talked about the neighborhood, and in the neighborhood, what FortiGuard does is being able to collect threat intelligence from the world, understanding the risks to our environments, and then providing our products with the ability to be able to have actionable threat intelligence. That can range from application control and intrusion prevention, but in this circumstance, really, it's about being able to have the appropriate threat intelligence services, things like indicators of compromise, to be able to then tell us that we have a risk to our environment, and then we can respond appropriately. So how we do this is that we do threat intelligence, we collect information globally, we then build the services that come out within our products and our product portfolios. To be able to give examples of this, is that this example is an example not from North America, but from the Middle East, which is the seventh largest global petroleum and natural gas producer, uses an extensive aspect of Fortinet. But what ultimately in the end is that they've used the full complete solution to be able to have an appropriate orchestration and automation of response to risk. So they've then taken what they're collecting from a telemetry perspective, feeding into the FortiManager and FortiAnalyzer to be able to do adds, moves, changes to the operational environment, but then also feeding the FortiSIM to be able to understand the context of the entire enterprise, which then leads to orchestration via the FortiSOAR and having threat hunters having a timely and appropriate response. So with that is as they're under attack, they can have the confidence that they know and have the visibility to throughout their entire environment to respond appropriately to that risk. So Cheryl, pass it over to you so that we can go into questions and answers at this particular point.
Thanks, Michelle. That was an impactful set of content in a very short window. I appreciate that. So our first question from the audience, I think, is appropriate. Given recent headlines, we've heard a lot about attacks, many that have impacted OT environments. What impact would have improved had some of those recent attacks been more situationally aware, given the incidents that we've read about?
That's an interesting question. And I think that what we're working to do is to be able to gain situational awareness so that then we can look at the risk to the environment. And I've had experience with end user customers who are speculating based on what they're seeing within their SOAR platforms, as an example, where they are going to their executive management saying, within a couple of days, I believe that we're going to be attacked. And then at that point, they have the opportunity to be able to shutter down the environment because they're looking at the indicators of compromise, they're looking at the risk to the environment, and then they're reacting before they get attacked. Now, that is a very good threat hunter, and it requires the automation capabilities as well as the people and the process side of the house. The key thing that we see within attacks today is that the attackers are getting on to the environments and then they're laterally moving. And so we need to be able to have the awareness of that lateral movement to be able to then stop them from executing on their plan within the environment. We have to assume compromise today. And from that assumption of compromise, we have to be looking and threat hunting in the environment to be able to reduce the risk to our environment. I hope that effectively answered the question.
I think that's a great place to start and evaluate what we learned from the media and what we think about our own environment. So great answer. With respect to client protection, one of
Mhm.
our audience members is saying, for example, a Windows 10 client. Fortinet has products for protection that are protected in FortiClient. And they're wondering, is FortiClient that Forti strategy for client protection, or are there other applications required?
Well, we have a division of Fortinet that's really focused towards endpoint, and that we have two different product portfolios, or actually several different product portfolios, depending upon what your needs are for a client. Now, in OT, we have a lot of legacy equipment, and so the FortiClient may not be appropriate for some of that legacy equipment because of the fact that we don't necessarily support all of the legacy operating systems. And so that's when we would start to inject a conversation of FortiEDR. Now in FortiClient, I talked about telemetry. We have a telemetry component of the FortiClient to be able to pull information out. And then there's also agents that we have for different systems like the SIM to be able to collect information. So I suggest that you use those from a client protection perspective as well. But from an EDR perspective, we want to be able to take into consideration the capabilities of EDR, and what EDR gives us is the ability of being able to wrap the kernel and protect the kernel of the operating system. And because of the nature of how the EDR works, we're able to support legacy operating systems back to things like XP or even NT. And so with that, those are the typical scenarios that we see within OT is because you may have a shop floor asset that's been around there for 20 years, and that 20-year-old asset is running Windows XP. We need to be able to protect with that. So I would recommend looking at EDR, but then you also have the ability of being able to look at XDR. And what XDR is incorporated within our fabric and taking the different component pieces and adding in threat hunting capabilities from the client perspective. And so if you want EDR that ultimately protects the endpoint and is automated and automatable, then threat hunting is XDR capabilities. And if you don't want to do this, we also have MDR, which is managed detection and response. Now in OT environments, typically we'll have closed environments, but if your environment is open, managed detection and response can be applied to OT environments as well.
Lots of options. Thanks for the explanation. One of our attendees has been a part of all three of the best practices sessions. So they've listened in on visibility, control, and situation awareness. So thank you for that. How equally weighted are these three elements when it comes to OT, cybersecurity, and the strategy you deploy in an OT environment?
Well, today I used the analogy of a home. I think in that, I think the analogy is fairly important, which is we have to have our foundation, and then we have to have our walls and windows, and then we have to have the roof to our house. And so, although equally important in my opinion, that you have to have a process and a structure to be able to understand how you're modifying security over the course of time, because the attackers never rest. We can't rest either. So visibility, absolutely critically important. You can't protect what you can't see. So foundationally, you have to have that foundation. Control, you can gain the situational awareness as an example, but without control, I can't act against that situational awareness. So I want to be able to have the visibility, control, and situational awareness from an equal perspective across my environment. And then in addition to that, I would also put in people and process, which is you want to be able to understand the people and how they're going to react to the situational awareness, to be able to put controls in place and to be able to have the visibility pieces.
Thanks, Michelle, for the content today and also for responding to those questions from our audience. As we wrap up this session, I just wanted to remind everyone that has attended today, you'll be receiving a note from Sherry regarding the third and final segment of our bracketology Nothing But Fortinet program. So for everyone that attended today, you'll be also invited to the April 1st event, which is the final four with Kenny, who you may be familiar with from ESPN, and he's got a lot of good insights about those semifinal matchups that are ahead. So watch for the information to join that bracketology event, and hopefully you've enjoyed that sequence as a part of this clinic for OT best practices. In our final slide, I wanted to invite you to a webinar that's coming up next week. And if you want to move ahead, Michelle, we can go to the next slide and share with the audience that we've got a webinar next Thursday called Securing OT in the Face of IoT, IIoT, and 5G. It's a topic that has come up in a number of customer and prospect conversations for Fortinet. How do I handle all these new industrial Internet of Thing devices coming onto my network? What does 5G have to do with my OT environment? How do I secure this advancing technology so that we are available and safe and then secure in these OT industrial environments? So we invite you, if you want that attendance, you can certainly check off the registration link that will come in your follow-up email tomorrow. We'd love to have you as a part of our audience for next week's session. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us. Please check out the handouts that we talked about earlier, our copy of the presentation Michelle covered, as well as the white paper, Securing OT Systems in the Face of Advancing Threats. Have a great day, and thank you for giving us a bit of your time. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you.